who would like, there's a little handout, very, very brief summary of this whole talk. It's right here in the library card. Oh, and also, if you'd get one of these blue books, we'll need it for our closing song. It's also on the library card. Our St. Paschal Sings. Great. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to St. Paschal Bailan. On behalf of our Spiritual Formation Commission between the two parishes of the Church of St. Clare and St. Paschal Bailan, I'd like to welcome you tonight for this special continuing formation series that we have from time to time to be able to get us in touch with a new document that came out last fall from Pope Francis, Fratelli, tutti. For those of you who we want to say a special welcome to those of us joining us online from around the world and here in Lyndhurst, Highland Heights, and South Euclid and environs. It's great to have you all joining us wherever you may be or watching it later on, as many people do through their convenience. It's great to have you here tonight and to be able to focus on this. And I'd like to begin with a prayer. And for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Father Lane. I'm the pastor here at St. Paschal Bailan, and it's great to have this opportunity to do something I love to do best, to have a time to be able to talk and reflect and to teach about one of the great new documents that has now adorning our church's life. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. From Fratelli tutti, a prayer to the Creator. Lord God of our human family, you created all human beings equal in dignity. Pour forth into our hearts a fraternal spirit and inspire in us a dream of renewed encounter, dialogue, justice, and peace. Move us to create healthier societies and a more dignified world, a world without hunger, poverty, violence, and war. May our hearts be open to all the peoples and nations of the earth. May we recognize the goodness and beauty that you have sown in each of us, and thus forge bonds of unity, common projects, and shared dreams. Amen. Amen. So that's one of the two closing prayers that Pope Francis has in this document, Fratelli tutti. It's Italian for all brothers and sisters, or all sisters and brothers. And so it's one of the things that it's interesting about this document that we're going to be reflecting upon tonight, that Pope Francis wrote it in his native Spanish, and it was translated from Spanish into the rest of the languages of the world. This is the Pope's third encyclical. So the encyclical is the highest level of teaching of any Pope. Anything higher would be from a Vatican Council or any other council of the Church, when all the bishops of the world will make some matter of statement or whatever. And that happens from time to time with synodal documents, or when the bishops gather in synod every couple of years. But our Pope, our current Pope, in his 8th year, and now he's longer as Pope than Pope Benedict. He's at this point now where he's been over 8 years as Pope, and his anniversary is coming up on March 13th. Where were you on March 13th of 2013? I was entertaining guests when we could do that. Remember when we used to be able to do that? I took friends of mine who were visiting me from Albuquerque, and we went down to Canton to see the First Ladies Museum and the McKinley Monument and all that stuff down there. And all of a sudden we got word there's a Pope, new Pope. So we drove back and we saw the whole thing live, of course, on TV. But it's hard to believe he's been Pope almost 8 years now. And this is his third document. The first document, just for those of you who are wondering, his first document he wrote was in 2013, and it was a co-authored papal encyclical. The first time it ever happened that Pope Benedict had started it, and then Pope Francis finished it, 2013. It's called Light of Faith, or we always use the Latin phrases when we write these international documents, Lumen Fide. The second one he wrote, 2015, was Laudate Si. And for those of you who want to know a little commercial, our parish mission between the parishes will be on Laudate Si in a couple of weeks, from February 27th to March 3rd. So the weekend masses, as well as on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday night of March 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So we'll be having a parish mission about that document in a couple of weeks. And then this is, of course, his third one. He wrote this one over the summer when he was in isolation. And he was inspired because he had gone to a meeting before we were isolated. He had gone, if you may recall, last spring to Abu Dhabi, February of 2019. He'd gone there for a meeting with the Grand Imam Al-Azhar. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. I've never heard anyone say his name. Now, in the Islamic community, they don't have like a number one leader. But there's different people who become leaders. And when he was with this imam, which is a leader of an Islamic community or a Muslim community, they signed a joint statement saying that Catholic Christians and Islamic folk would work together for peace and social dignity among the nations of the world. It was a first to make such an international thing. And if you remember, it was one of those interesting things where they had an outdoor mass. And we here at St. Paschal's, the mass that we do, Mass of Spirit and Grace, we sing, that was premiered at that papal mass there outside. There was about 200,000 people who came from all over the Arabian Peninsula to be there. And when he was with this event, he said, we need to do more as religious leaders. And so after having this experience, and then of course the pandemic came, he decided to write this encyclical over the summer. And true to his name, Francis, he wanted to implement it on St. Francis of Assisi, who has great inspiration in his life over. Obviously, he took the name Francis because he loved Francis so much, and the spirituality and the theology of St. Francis that he imbued. And Pope Francis has been to Assisi 4 times as Pope, so it's a place near and dear to his heart. And back on the solemnity of St. Francis's feast day, which is, of course, for the world, it's the 3rd and the 4th. It begins in the evening of the 3rd and continues the whole day of the 4th. He signed this document at the tomb of St. Francis. Any of you who've been to Assisi know there's that beautiful, beautiful basilica. Almost 2 years ago, we had a parish pilgrimage, and we had Mass not at the tomb of St. Francis, but in a room next to that tomb. But we could hear people outside of us singing a Mass in Italian while we were doing our Mass in English. It's that, it's a vivacious thing. So he had his little trip there in the beginning of October 2020 to be able to promulgate, share with the world, Fratelli, tutti, and basically say, we need to do something better as the world and as world leaders. And he called all religious leaders. It's a quote I put down on your little sheet there, the little guide thing. Religious leaders are called to be true people of dialogue in cooperation in building God's kingdom. He has seen what has happened in our world with religious ideologies taking over. People thinking that, every Christian just wants to bomb an Islamic person, or every Jew is fanatical, or every Islamic person is whatever. And we know that 95%, if not more people in this planet are peace-loving, caring people. But there's also world leaders in countries that are going into ideologies that are not helpful for the common good of all the brothers and sisters of our common planet. And so it's been a common theme for Pope Francis to regularly talk about our common home and what we can do as God's people to be able to do something about making it better. And that was the inspiration then why he sat down and wrote this document. How many of you had a chance to ever read it or look at it? I know she had to, because that's just Gail, but also because she's a teacher at a Catholic high school here in town, Beaumont School for Girls, the award-winning school. And of course, you have too, and you got the book. Did you read it all the way through? Great. For those of you who don't know, it's like the New Testament. So when people say, oh my God, it was 200 and how many paragraphs long? 87 paragraphs, plus these prayers at the end. People are like, oh my God, that seems like short, or it's like 8 chapters plus a little closing thing. People think, oh my God, it must have been huge as a book. Well, show it up again for us there, Sean. It's not. The font's big when you get that edition. But it's like the New Testament. You know how the Bible can be like small print and it's like a pamphlet, or it can be bigger print and it looks bigger? That's the layout of the document. And these 8 chapters, which I'm going to briefly go through, but also provide some reflection questions for us to think about for ourselves, really highlight, and through their titles, give us an experience of it, of what Pope Francis wants us all, not just Catholic Christians, but Pope Francis is really good about inviting the whole world to dialogue with him. He feels he's like one pilgrim on the journey. He's not there to lord it over us. And he consults widely when he writes his encyclicals. So for instance, like when he wrote the Laudate Si, the environmental document, he had scientists co-writing with him. In fact, some famous scientists at Santa Clara University, Jesuit place out there in California. He is a Jesuit pope, and he shows his Jesuitical behavior, which means he likes to think, discern, pray, and then write. And all of us who's gone to an Ignatian school know that that's part of what it means to have a Jesuit spirituality and then share that with the world. As we say at Ignatius, you know, how do you know someone went to Ignatius? They'll tell you. And how do you know if you had Ignatius spirituality? They'll show it. We are men or women, men and women for others. And that's what Pope Francis always does with all his documents, whether you like it or not, okay? He's got that Jesuit spirituality, just as you hear me doing St. Peter, Jew, and Amart spirituality. See, I have to talk about Amart in every talk I give, somehow, right? A Eucharistic spirituality is very important to me, and you each have your own charism, and this is the charism that Pope Francis shares with us. So let's go right into the document and each of these chapters. And he goes immediately into talking about the dark clouds over a closed world. And this is paragraphs 9 through 55. So it'd be like the prologue, you know, that the Gospel of John has, where chapter 1 is that, and then he goes over into the Word was made flesh and dwelled among us. So Pope Francis is saying, you know, there's some shattered dreams, and people are having shattered dreams in the world. Everyone has hopes, and things are not allowing those hopes to happen. And one of the things I think he says is very important is in paragraph 13, that people don't have a sense of history anymore. Many people have lost the idea that we can consume as much as we wish, no matter the cost to the environment or the poverty that this creates. This has been an ongoing theme for Pope Francis in his 8 years as Pope. And he, coming from Buenos Aires, Argentina, and being part of the Jesuit community throughout Argentina, and seeing what's going on in South America. And I can tell you from my own experience, I sort of won a trip to Argentina a couple years back, and I took advantage of it. Who wouldn't want to go, right? And I went there, and it's just so interesting to see the truly 1% that have and the rest that don't. And that experience forms Pope Francis as he has traveled the world and he sees what's going on as people have lost that sense of history of building the body of Christ, to use St. Paul's theology. He says we're a throwaway culture in paragraphs 18 to 25. We're so wasteful, and there are so many people that are being unwanted as well. And this is where he works in the fact about the unborn not being unwanted in certain cultures in our world. We want to throw them away because it's not serving our needs. And we throw away food and other things. He also throws it in paragraph 19 that we are abandoning and ignoring the needs of the elderly, and that this too is a huge respect life issue. Pope Francis focuses a lot about the universal human rights and the dignity of everyone. And in paragraphs 22 to 24, he goes into a little bit more detail. These paragraphs aren't very long. but in this short, succinct way, he gets at the root of things. And he says that we are too much becoming people who are involved with conflict, which just leads us into being fearful people. And with the globalization that's going on right now, we're all so connected. I mean, just the very fact that we're broadcasting this tonight live, but it'll be on forever on the internet. People will watch it tomorrow from our religious communities or from our homes everywhere. We're all connected. And with email, and this is in paragraph 29, he says something really cute here. I agree there have been many advances in science, technology, medicine, manufacturing, and welfare. But at the same time, we can also see a moral decline and weak spiritual values. Resources are not distributed fairly. And even when millions of children die of hunger, there is a deafening silence for world leaders. We used to do as world leaders, immediately have the UN go into battle, as it were, and drop rice or things into countries anymore. And now when these things are happening in our world, it's not happening as quickly. And he also talks about our current pandemic in paragraphs 32 to 36. And he says the pandemic has been a blessing because it has helped us become aware again that we are all brothers and sisters all. And let's talk about that phrase, brothers and sisters all. The name of the document, Fratelli, tutti. This comes from St. Francis of Assisi. Any religious leader like St. Peter Julian Amart or St. Ignatius of Loyola, St. Dominic, Angela Merici, St. Angela Merici, Ursuline Sisters, or Julie Billiard's founder of the Sisters of Notre Dame, they would always write little fervorino letters to their religious all the time as a way to be able to encourage them and then, of course, share. This was before telephones. It's not like we're able to write and call people and say, hey, how you doing? It's give my love to the brothers or give my love to the sisters. They would write lengthy messages and people. And St. Francis was noted for always writing brothers and sisters all, meaning we're all brothers and sisters, and let's share and remind ourselves of that. It's kind of like what Paul would do when he wrote his letters to the body of Christ. And he does that to be able to say that this pandemic has reminded us all for the first time in over 100 years, because even back then when the Spanish flu was going on in 1918 through 1921, people didn't have a sense that people in other foreign countries were having the same problem. We just thought it was here. We didn't have that interconnectedness where we do have that now, and that's been a good thing to realize, travel. I can't get on an airplane now and go and visit my cousin in South Africa. I might bring back something that's not helpful. And we have these illusions about human dignity, and we've created more borders rather than more reality of us being able to be interconnected. And from paragraphs 37 to 41, he really talks about the borders, not just physical walls, but other spiritual and mental walls that are happening. I don't know, one of the shows I binge watched while I was on it started at Christmas, but then I finished on vacation, was the show The Good Place. It used to be on the Peacock network, and now you can stream it. What was very interesting, and this is something that he touches upon in the document, is you can have a show about heaven, but never talk about God or spirituality. And that we're doing that in our world and in our society today, where we're not taking the opportunity to recognize we are God's children, and we're all so interconnected. We have this illusion of communication. He spends time for several paragraphs, from 42 to 50, talking about how while we fear and shun newcomers on our shores, the distance between people is shrinking because of travel and technology. So we have people who could be close to us, but we've got this weird thing going on where we still keep them away from us. And entire campaigns of hatred are now conducted online. We certainly know that what we've experienced in our country with all the stuff on those social media networks. Some people see online groups, Pope Francis says, as a form of mutual support. But in fact, they are mainly enclaves of the like-minded or focused on a single perceived enemy. So we get into these little groups and social chat rooms where we only are with like-minded people. If I could put a little plug out here, there's a man in the back here who spent over a year and a half working on a book to be in an online platform and thing to be able to talk about how can we be with someone who doesn't have the same ideology as us, and how can we dialogue and work together. That's not happening in social media today. We have our media outlets and we watch it, or we stick with that, and we don't necessarily take the time to watch others or read others. And Ted Wetzel, who's in the back here, he's got a book, and he can talk to you about 9 ways to be able to work together as God's people better. So this is a huge thing that is happening. And how many of you are in an online chat with someone else? Or how many of you have friends that don't share your same political ideology or economic ideology? There's a shameless aggression, he says, where people are crude, hateful, and violent things are said on these quasi-public forums that risk the loss of respect. And he says in paragraph 45, even some political figures do this. I don't know who he's talking about. Now, the results of this online hate speech are defamation and slander, and this does not contribute to the welfare of the human family. So he spends a lot of time reminding us of what's really going on in our world. He's very connected about that. But he ends chapter 1 with hope in paragraphs 54 and 55. He says, these may be the dark clouds that appear in today's world's horizons, but there are pathways of hope emerging. People realize that their lives are interwoven. Many heroes have stepped forward in COVID-19 with medical, retail, and transportation workers, to name a few, and they are great resources of hope for the world. I'll never forget people I know here in the parish or otherwise who said, I never thought being a worker at the grocery store would be an essential worker. I never thought I'd get that title. I'm just putting out bananas every day. I didn't know I was that important. But he reminds us, Pope Francis is always a person of hope. He says, number 55, let us become people of hope. I want you to think for a moment. In this section, what has emerged for you? What have you in your lives observed about technology and the spread of hate and fear rather than love and hope? What do you fear these days in our community, in our nation? And how do you recognize that fear with our faith? I know some of you are taking notes, so maybe you might want to jot something scriptural, like maybe the phrase, the angel Gabriel says to Mary, do not be afraid. Let's now move ahead to chapter 2. Like most documents in the church, we try to throw scripture in them and give that a little bit of like a bookends of meaning to help us reflect. And this is no stranger than to this document as well. Pope Francis in chapter 2 spends most of the document, this chapter, talking about Luke chapter 10 and the Good Samaritan story. And he spends a lot of time talking about the abandoned on the wayside, the story being constantly retold, the character of the story, starting anew, and the neighbors in our lives. The parable, of course, that Jesus gives of the Good Samaritan is kind of interesting, especially in our own day and time. It never more than ever, we're told not to go out or be close to someone. We're told to, not to hug people. We're told not to kiss people. And it's like we're living the rabbi and the priest in the story and not the Samaritan in the story because of the cultural realities we're dealing with our health crisis. But Pope Francis spends some time in paragraphs 80 through 86, saying that this parable ends with Jesus saying, "Go and do likewise. Put aside our differences of nationality or race," just as the Samaritan did in the story, "and reach out across the borders to become neighbors without borders." Number 82, he says, yes, we must assist even those we are most likely to shy away from. Number 83, we are called to love beyond our prejudices and our petty interests. He pleads that we as Christians especially should heed the words of Jesus, that we are compelled always as Christians to recognize Christ in each of our abandoned or excluded brothers and sisters. And he refers to Matthew chapter 25. That's where we get our social teachings as Catholic Christians. Faith has an untold power to inspire and sustain our respect for others. That should be always at the foundation of who we are as Christians. And Pope Francis wants to elevate that and remind us how important that is. And in chapter 3, he then goes into envisioning and engendering an open world. He starts to dream and imagine and go back to what it would be like to think about, when we were maybe beyond this pandemic, what we could go back to it as our core values as Christian people. Where in number 88, he says, love draws us out of ourselves and impels us toward others. Think of you who maybe were named a godparent and when you got a godchild and you got to hold a child for the first time. Or those of you who became parents or grandparents. What always happens? As soon as that baby's there, oh my God, you just are so consumed by it. You're not thinking about yourself. You might have a headache, but you're more worried, is this baby's diaper going to be going all over you maybe, or something like that. Or what can I do to feed the baby? Or what can I do to help the baby? And as they grow older, I always said I wanted 12 kids, which is why no one ever wanted to marry me, because they thought I was nuts. But I was very lucky, and I'm very lucky that my brother had 7 kids, and I have 5 godchildren. So I got my 12 kids. I don't know how I keep managing them all, but thank God there's texting, right? But I just remember the first time I went on vacation with one of my godchildren, and I left him at the door. I only had him for 2 weeks. But when I gave him back, I was just crying like a baby. I drove down the street, and I could not stop thinking. And I thought, this is what the gospel talks about, love. The whole trip I was worried, is he getting enough to eat? Because he's a growing teenage, he's 18 years old. Is he doing enough? And I realized, as Pope Francis is always saying, when you see him reaching out to the handicapped, to a Muslim woman that he washes feet at Holy Thursday, he's always going out to show that he is loving another person, and that's what we are all called to do. And he reminds us in paragraph 93 that love makes it possible for us to seek the good of others. I want to repeat that. 93. Such love makes it possible for us to see the good of others. We're all, in a sense, called to be godparents of one another. And love helps us be ever more open and helps us integrate everyone in society. In paragraph 100, he calls for that love to transcend borders, and he says, I'm not suggesting a planned global universalism, especially one aimed at plundering or dominating others. This is false universalism, which demands that we all be alike in order to share community. No, without saying it, Pope Francis is saying what Paul said. We need the tongue, we need the hand, we need the foot, we need the ear. We all don't have to be the same, but we do need to be the same in loving one another and beyond a world of associates. He brings up something, when we go to these stores, we hear sales associate, or this is my associate, or team members, or something like that. We see each other as associates who can help achieve our goals, rather than what can I do for the other person. We're using people rather than being with people. And we're all called to liberty, equality, and fraternity And he over and over says that this is what universal love promotes in the dignity of each person. The title of this, or the subtitle of the document is on fraternity and social friendship. And he explains what this is about in paragraphs 106 through 111. That the basis of social friendship is that everyone has worth and dignity, no matter who they are. I think I'd like to say, and if I'm paraphrasing him a little bit, that we want to be friend and neighbor to everyone. That's what we're called to be, to grow into. And in paragraph 108, he says that all economic systems should be safe to provide room for each person, even the slow, the weak, or the least talented. Least talented. Sometimes in our society, oh yeah, fine, we'll get, like in Highland Heights here in Mayfield School District, we'll have a school for the deaf, but we're not going to do anything for the blind. We already have a school for the deaf. Pope Francis is saying that's not providing room for each person. And promoting the moral good is also extremely important to him, and the value of solidarity. Solidarity is a chief moral virtue, says Pope Francis in paragraph 114. It teaches us that we're responsible for one another. You know, when we use the word fraternity or solidarity or something like that, we do maybe perhaps think about those college fraternities, when we're brothers to one another. We do whatever we want for one another. I know when I think of people I've gone to school with, it's like it's my classmate. Do we see one another in this reality? As Pope Francis says, it means we're all in the same boat. Paragraph 117. So, how do we improve the rights of people? He wants us to go back to us helping develop their full dignity. Chapter 4, he continues to expound upon this and just belabor a point. Chapter 4's title is A Heart Open to the Whole World. It encourages us to have reciprocal gifts that we want to share with one another, a fruitful exchange. In paragraph 137, he says, poverty, illiteracy, and disease in one part of the plan will inevitably affect all the people of the earth. Either we cooperate so that we all feel safe, or we are all lost. And I think that's how sometimes people feel right now, like they're waiting for the vaccine. Right now, I hear many people like, you know, struggling with, oh, why didn't that group of people, why didn't all the 80-year-olds and older get it yet? You know, people really want to make sure that we're all being cared for and taken care of, and they have their rights and respectful dignity given to them. It's a very important, fruitful exchange, he says, that we are all called to have. But not to lose the local flavor that makes us all unique and special. He highlights that in paragraphs 143 and 145. A lot of times people accuse Pope Francis or other religious leaders of being, you know, perhaps socialist versus capitalist. They use titles or political perspectives. And he's very careful not to want to be boxed in by saying that and going that way. So, some questions for you to think about here and just pause for a second. What fears do you or your neighbors have as new immigrants or refugees arrive in our nation and community? This is questions that come from Pope Francis. What are the fears we have, or other people that you know have, as to why immigrants or refugees arrive in our nation and community? What gifts have past newcomers brought to us? Is there something as our parish or parishes that we could do to make our parishes more welcoming? And last question for a moment to think about. How do you feel the Good Samaritan story could be lived out in your life or in our community? Why don't you stand for a second, stretch, and think about what you're saying, what I'm saying, what he's saying. And maybe if there's an insight that you'd like to share real quick, something that I've stuck, I'm about halfway through the document now. So. We'll take that online caller. Yes, is the caller there? That's why I wish we could have call-in. You remember when Oprah used to have her microphone? She'd go around. Caller there. Any insight? Yes, Sean.
I struck by Pope's reference to a loss of a sense of history.
Yes.
It plays out as you read more about him in his writings, and in this whole idea of fear of the stranger. And Pope Francis made a good point in his first, his other encyclical, and about knowing history. We talked about a tree or we now are only strong. We only have what we have because of the roots that we came from.
Right. Let me share that with the people so they can hear everywhere. She was, you can have a seat if you'd like. Sean mentioned about the sense that Pope Francis has about knowing our history, how it's important we know where we came from, and especially like the metaphors that are used not only just in this encyclical but in Laudate Si, which is on the environment and creation, to know our history, that we have always been so rooted and connected to the environment and to trees, and that we have to know, of course we see above what's above ground and the leaves and the branches and we reach out, but it's always rooted into the ground, and there's strong roots and a strong foundation that have a sense of a past and a history. So I hope I summarized you good enough for there. And that's so true. And a lot of what Pope Francis is saying in this document is building upon what he's written before or homilies that he's given before and summarizing it and putting it into one whole document, this encyclical. So let's move on then to other suggestions that the Pope gives now as he does this in chapter 5 and following. In chapter 5, he talks about a better kind of politics. Those of you who are fans of the musical and movie Evita know that politics is the art of the possible. I think it's kind of cute. Pope Francis comes from Buenos Aires, so I just can't help him thinking of Dancing with Evita, in the old days down there. And he talks about new forms of populism and liberalism, and this culture that we've created, popular versus populist. And he tries to talk a little bit about the government by the people is the basis of democracy, and it's a great value for the world. He says this in 157. But there are limits in liberal approaches right now and economic systems that are exploiting the resources of so many for the financial gain of a few. He delves into this in paragraph 163. And more importantly, he goes into the fact about the international powers that are at work. He reminds us of the global financial crisis in 2007 and 2008. Look how long it took, I know just here in northeastern Ohio, how long it took us, over 10 years, some would say maybe 13 years it took us to bounce back because of a few people controlling the resources of so many. Between the housing crisis and all the other things that were involved with that. These systems, as he says, are more entrenched, and we insist that no person or group has then the right to bypass the rights and dignities of other people. There should be a social and political charity. This is paragraph 176, where we need to sell political life within each station in order to grow toward universal fertility and social peace. Basically, he's giving an image of nature again. We need to sow seeds that then sprout so that everyone may enjoy this, and that brings about social peace. And that's the politics we need. It's a politics of love. And he says in paragraph 180 that all politicians should work for the social charity of their nations. and embrace this sacred field that they are part of. That we're called to exercise political love. And he goes back to the fact in paragraph 188, politicians are called to look beyond their own popularity and their own borders to find ways to safeguard everyone in society. Not just who elected them, but what we do affects other people. And I think that's something that we have seen more and more by what we don't do as either a city or a county, a state, the nation. Look at right now, I don't know about you, if you've noticed it, but it just seems like we just care about our own little world, but our own little world has an effect on the bigger worlds. And fruitfulness is more important than the results. Political love leads to tenderness, a word that Pope Francis loves to use a lot. Political love leads to tenderness, in which the most vulnerable are valued and cared for. That's paragraph 194. 196, good politics brings love and hope together. It provides the stage in which goodness is played out in society. Politics is made more noble when the politician can ask, how much did I love? Instead, how popular was I? What steps, question to think about. What steps are being taken for the vulnerable in my little world? Basically our world. How are we doing this, and how is that contributing to our national policy? Chapter 6 reminds us of the dialogue and friendship we're called to have in society. That this is part and should be part of our culture of building together, of building consensus together. And that consensus then leads to a true and powerful truth. This is in paragraphs 211 and 214. When everyone has their voice heard and everyone listens to one another, we're much better for it. It's like a quilt that then once together puts everything together and truly embraces everyone and makes everyone feel warm. And I love the fact that he's saying we need to recover kindness. And he spends 3 paragraphs talking about that in paragraphs 222 to 224. That's going to be my penance. If you come to me for confession, I'm just warning you in advance. Maybe you'll find another priest. Now that you know, your penance will be, who will I be kind to, or who needs my kindness today? I think that's something, I just see more and more. And I think, this pandemic has made us all diseased, all at ease. I was on vacation at a store where they had a store coupon, and this person was arguing with the cashier about a 10-cent coupon. And didn't get what they want. They were talking so loud. I was on vacation, so I was in the produce section, getting my bananas. I found where the yogurt was, went back there. I could hear them all the way back there. And then they got the manager. And they were yelling at the manager that you are ripping me off 10 cents on whatever the product was. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. 10 cents, you're making this much of a fuss for 15 minutes, of my shopping experience. I couldn't hear the music because of him. But where was the kindness there? And why are we wanting to go into conflict? He goes into this in the meaning of forgiveness, the legitimate forgiveness that we're called to be. Paragraph 242. The important thing is not to fuel anger, which is unhealthy for our own soul and the soul of other people, or to become obsessed with taking revenge and destroying the other. I think that's a beautiful way of rephrasing several of the gospel passages that Jesus talks about. Pope Francis is saying, let's just, move on to what really matters most, and not these things matter. 10 cents off of whatever you're buying at that store doesn't need to have it. But yet, he says we should have this forgiveness and we should move on, and reconciliation is very important to us. But he says certain things should never be forgotten. The Shoah, or the Holocaust, should never be forgotten. The atomic bombs being dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki should not be forgotten. We as people should never allow these things to happen again. But he worries these things will happen again because we're starting to put people as other all the time. Those people, well, you know what they are like. Those type of ideologies or discussions allow us to then categorize and want to eliminate. Pope Francis says in paragraph 251, those who truly forgive do not forget. Instead, they choose not to yield to the same destructive force that caused them so much suffering. They break the vicious circle. They halt the advance of the forces of destruction. They choose not to spread in society the spirit of revenge that will sooner or later return to take its toll. Revenge never truly satisfies victims. Some crimes are so horrendous and cruel that the punishment of those who perpetuate them does not serve to repair the harm done. Even killing the criminal would not be enough, nor could any form of torture prove commiserate with the sufferings inflicted on the victim. Revenge resolves nothing. And it's from this document that the Pope then clarified Christians do not believe in the death penalty. It is not healthy for us. On vacation, I streamed a lot of movies, and one of the movies I streamed was about Tesla, the man who really helped propel electricity and the new way of distributing electricity from Edison. It's a cute little movie, but one of the things that was unfortunately part of the invention of electricity was the electric chair. And isn't it odd and strange that the electric chair was first used on the same day that the bomb was first dropped at Hiroshima? The terrible day of destruction that we as Catholic Christians know as the Feast of the Transfiguration. And it was so weird to see in this movie, it portrayed how the electric chair, they didn't know how to use electricity, but Edison was called to testify about allowing electricity to kill someone. He said, I cannot agree with this at all. I am not for the death penalty. And electricity should not be used in this fashion. So Pope Francis really wants to say that it might seem that way, but I don't know about you if you've ever been around victims who have been around these crimes and things and want that revenge, and then they get there, what they think revenge, and then they're just in a circle of perpetual agony. So he focuses a little bit about the injustice of war and the deceit that is part of war. But he goes back to Pope John the 23rd, now Saint Pope John the 23rd, who wrote about war and peace in 1963. And he quotes that encyclicum, Pacem in Terram, Peace on Earth, which Pope John the 23rd said that we cannot allow the Cold War and other wars to take over us. And the use of weaponry is never acceptable for the common good. Every war, he says in paragraph 261, worsens our world. War is a failure of politics and of humanity, a shameful capitulation, a stinging defeat before the forces of evil. Let us not remain mired in theoretical discussions, but touch the wounded flesh of the victims. I know so many people, I knew some chaplains who were at battlefields, and once you are there and see what you do or what has happened because people have suffered at the causes of war, you never will want war again. And Pope Francis reminds us of that, and the true stories he has heard and the victims of violence that he has been a part of. And then from paragraphs 263 to 270, he states very clearly again the position of the Catholic Church, building on what St. John Paul II said and just saying it is not acceptable for human dignity. God guarantees and pledges human life, and it is up to God alone to take our life. Chapter 8 then goes into the religions at the service of fraternity in our world. that each religion has something to offer our world and help building up the human community. That religions, just like political life, are not restrained for the private sphere. On the contrary, we cannot be on the sidelines in building a better world. And Pope Francis says in this paragraph 276 that we're called to reawaken the spiritual energy that can contribute to the betterment of society. Again, he says again, it is true that religious ministers must not engage in the party politics that are a proper domain of the laity, but neither can they renounce the political dimension of life itself, which involves a constant attention to the common good and a concern for integral human development. The church has a public role over and above her charitable role and educational activities. She works for the advancement of humanity. She does not claim to compete with earthly powers, but to offer herself as a family among families. This is the church, open to bearing witness in today's world, open to faith, hope, and love for the Lord, and for those whom the Lord loves with a preferential love. A home with open doors. The church is a home with open doors because she is a mother. And in imitation of Mary, the mother of Jesus, we want to be a church that serves, that leaves home and goes forth from its places of worship, goes forth from its sacristies in order to accompany life, to sustain hope, to be the sign of unity, to build bridges, to break down walls, to sow seeds of reconciliation. That's a huge paragraph 276 with a lot of important things. It's one that should be read over and over and thought about a lot. And Pope Francis also says in 284 that fundamentalist violence is unleashed in small groups of whatever religion by the rashness of their leaders. Yet, the commandment of peace is inscribed in the depths of all religious traditions. Sometimes people will come up and say, oh, I saw this religion or that religion, they're trying to eradicate or get rid of Christians or Jews or Muslims, whatever. True religions do not have that. They're people of dialogue in cooperation with building peace. And I know here at St. Pascal's, we've been very fortunate and blessed to have a wonderful relationship with the Turkish American community and the Muslim community in the area. They love to celebrate Ramadan with us. And in those experiences, we see people of peace, people who want to build bridges and grow. Some questions for reflection then, as we wrap this up. And some of these may be very personal that you may need to grapple with. Because I know a lot of people say, oh, I don't want to believe that part of the church. I'm more of a cafeteria Catholic. I take from this salad bar, and I take from that thing, and I take from that. So, how, when you hear the Pope and the Church's view on the death penalty, does it influence you and make you feel to know that you are part of a church that wants to love people even when they've done such horrible wrongs? And another question. What are your experiences of forgiveness in your life when you have had to forgive someone who has truly wronged you? Pope Francis ends his document by saying, I pray to God that I truly be the brother of all. And I think that's an interesting thing for all of us to pray for ourselves. May I be a sister or brother to all people, like Fratelli, tutti. I mean, that would be a great thing for me to go around. Fratelli, tutti, Fratelli, tutti. We are all brothers and sisters, one to another. And what can I do to always be that brother and sister to you or to me? How can I be a better brother? How can I be a better sister? A very important question to ask myself, and I think a great way for us to prepare for Lent. which then helps us prepare to be a better Christian in our world today. What questions do you have? Yes.
And, so what I think he's doing is bringing back to the forefront, to our attention, these teachings have been part of a modern church.
Well, and I'll even go a little bit further back. 1891, Pope Leo the 13th and Pope Pius the 12th. Pope Francis doesn't quote them as much in this document. He quotes John Paul II a lot, Benedict. Yes, to just let others know what Gail said. This is just not like, out of nowhere. Pope Francis is building on the tradition of the church and the modern papacy and the modern popes, as they have always tried to be, to not use your words, but they've always tried to be olive branches to our world and to build on this. The death penalty and us being opposed to the death penalty is just not something new. It was like the other day when it was on the news, it was like, church now opposes the death penalty. Well, we always have opposed the death penalty, but it's not something new. So yes, thank you for that insight. So it's just like a little unenthusiastic, mediocre document. Did you get that impression tonight? It's truly a wonderful thing, theological, spiritual, prayerful. It helps us do an examination of conscience, not just on the Good Samaritan story and that parable, but also I think on Matthew chapter 25 and, visiting the sick. The song, whatsoever you do to the least of my sisters and brothers, my people, I think is the new words, to the least of my peoples, that you do to me. I think that's really an important message as we're brothers and sisters of all. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, Bill.
I would see on TV where a black person was killed. And often they would forgive the killer.
Yeah. Yes. Just to let our friends at home know, he said it's always impressed me, so I saw a black person on TV when there was someone in their family and friends killed, and they would forgive that person, and how that impressed him. I'll never forget a couple years back, it's probably many years back now, but remember that Amish community where they were devastated, where so many people in the Amish community were wiped out with a mass murder, and they just took the rest of that family, they took that guy into their home and they prayed with them and embraced them. Truly love, truly fraternal love, and recognizing we're brothers and sisters, and recognizing that people do these horrible things because they too have not been loved. They too have not been cared for. And they're just perpetuating the violence that was done to them. So, yes. Pope Francis ends this encyclical with two prayers. One that we prayed at the beginning together, a prayer to the Creator. And then the last prayer is an ecumenical Christian prayer that he offers to the world. And I want you, if you kindly look in your St. Paschal Sings, and also to alert our videographer, we will be singing in this book, number 77, Let There Be Peace on Earth, and I'll accompany you. But that's something, I wanted to sing Prayer St. Francis, but it's not available for us right now. But to think about these songs and these words, I don't know if that helps you as you try to build a better world for yourself, as you try to be a better Christian disciple in our world today. But let's also pray that all Christians everywhere continue to embrace the gospel and to grow in fraternal friendship and solidarity friendship as we try to build a better world together. Thank you so much for coming and for being here and for being a part of this presentation. O God, Trinity of love, from the profound communion of your divine life, pour out upon us a torrent of fraternal love. Grant us the love reflected in the actions of Jesus in his family of Nazareth and in the early Christian community. Grant that we Christians may live the gospel, discovering Christ in each human being, recognizing him crucified in the sufferings of the abandoned and forgotten of our world, and risen in each brother or sister who makes a new start. Come, Holy Spirit, show us your beauty, reflected in all the peoples of the earth, so that we may discover anew that all are important and all are necessary, different faces of the one humanity that God so loves. Amen. Let there be peace on earth. Let us stand together and sing.
On earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be with God our Creator, family our way. Let us walk with each other in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my solemn vow to take each moment and live each moment in peace eternal.